This is Pam Menaker, Communications Partner at Clifford Law Offices, and I'm going to introduce for you Bradley M. Cosgrove, B-R-A-D-L-E-Y, middle initial M, last name C-O-S-G-R-O-V-E, partner at Clifford Law Offices. And I'm going to just hand it over to him. We also have our associate here, Devin, D-E-V-I-N, J, Piper, P-I-P-E-R, like Piper, and he is an associate who also worked on the case. And I'm going to hand it over, though, to Brad at this point, who will be introducing his clients here from Clifford Law. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Good afternoon, actually. My name is Brad Cosgrove. I'm a partner at Clifford Law Offices. We have the pleasure of introducing to you Jenny and Tony DAngelo, our clients. Last evening at about 7:45, a 12-person juror in the Cook County Circuit Court entered a verdict that was a record verdict for a stroke patient like Mr. DAngelo of just under $40 million. The case dates back to 2015. This case has been fought against Advocate Health Partners, doing business as Advocate Physician Partners, for many, many years. It's gone up to the appellate court on various issues, and we are very happy that the jury got the verdict right, and we are finally able to get justice for Tony and to make sure that he's able to get all the health care that he's going to need for the rest of his life. This case involves really a story of managed care organization. Advocate Physician Partners is a managed care organization that contracts with doctors that they call aligned doctors. They set up a system where patients are given a list of names to choose from, and the patients have to select a hospital location. In this case, the patient selected Advocate Good Shepherd Hospital, where they selected Advocate Good Shepherd Hospital, and they gave a list of names where they selected a primary care doctor. From there, the patient went to go see a primary care doctor, essentially for a cough that wouldn't go away for about 2 months. The doctor saw the patient, and it turned out his blood pressure was extraordinarily high that day, and he was in what's called a hypertensive urgency. Rather than treating the hypertensive urgency and performing the necessary testing of an EKG and fundoscopic evaluation, the doctor sent Mr. DAngelo home for a 2-week period to do home blood pressure readings that were recommended to be performed. And unfortunately, on March 11th of 2015, Tony suffered a hemorrhagic stroke from uncontrolled hypertension. Had proper standard of care medicine been followed, Tony would have received an appropriate dose of antihypertensive medications, what we all call blood pressure pills or blood pressure medicine. That would have reduced his blood pressure, and certainly would have reduced his blood pressure within what's called goal range within 30 days, and it would have prevented Tony's stroke. As a result of the stroke, Tony had to relearn how to walk again, which he does obviously with serious difficulties. He had to relearn to talk again, had to relearn how to do all activities of daily living, many of which are grossly impaired today. Tony was declared incompetent and unable to testify by the court. Judge Preston Jones presided over the trial and gave a very fair trial to the parties, and ruled that Tony was not allowed to testify because he was declared disabled by a probate court back in 2015. Now, Jenny has a brief statement that she has prepared that she'd like to read to you, and I'll be available for questions afterwards. So, thank you.
My name is Jennifer DAngelo. I'm the wife of Tony DAngelo. The last 9 years of our lives and that of our children have been a living hell. No one could ever understand what it means to go through life with a husband who one day is working full-time to suddenly being completely disabled and requiring round-the-clock care for the rest of his life. Every day we cry. Every day we wish we could return back to when he could walk and talk like everyone else. Instead, we were faced with years of legal battle against Advocate Health Partners who refused to do justice for our family. Last night, a jury saw justice. After sitting through 2 weeks of evidence at trial, they weren't able to give my husband and my children's dad his life back, but they saw the huge mistakes that were made. Through their verdict, we hope to get the wheelchair access that Tony requires to get through the day, through many days, weeks, months, and years that he deserves, that our whole family deserves. And none of this would have been possible without my lawyers, Brad Cosgrove, Chuck Haskins, and Devin Piper, who never gave up. They kept fighting for what was right. We believed in them. The jury believed in them. And they achieved the justice that we held on to so dearly, knowing that the right result would happen.
I obviously have a lot of other things we could talk about, but I thought I'd open up to questions if anybody has any questions to start with.
When you say record breaking, is that for Chicago? Is that nationwide?
So my understanding is that an inquiry was made to the Illinois jury verdict reporter and asked what the record verdict has been for a stroke case in the state of Illinois. And it was reported to us upon request this morning that the prior record was, I believe, like $33 million. 31.5 million, and that this jury verdict is the highest jury verdict for a stroke victim in the state of Illinois. The prior verdict, I think, was like 10 years, or the prior record was about 10 years old.
2006.
2006.
Can you talk about just, I don't know, Mrs. wants to talk about just kind of like life now and where
So life,
from here?
yeah, well, where we go from here is we have to make sure that Advocate Health Partners pays the verdict. That's where the next step is. We've got to get them to pay the verdict, and from there, what the family plans to do is to try to get a foundation together to try to help other people with aphasia. That's really what their goal is, to try to work together and to figure out a way to do some form of a charitable organization to try to help other people with aphasia. Aphasia is a part of the remnants of the stroke that Tony still has that cause a lot of problems. If you go to ask Tony a question, he knows what he wants to say. It's there in his brain. He just simply cannot match what he wants to say with what he's thinking in his head, and it's obviously very frustrating, such that he carries a business card in his pocket with him that says, "I have aphasia, not a lack of intellect, just a problem with speech." It's essentially what it is. We could show it to you guys later. And what they really want to do is they want to try to help awareness of people who suffer from aphasia and to try to see if they can spread some awareness of the disease that comes with stroke sometimes.
Just from an emotional standpoint, where do you guys go from here? I mean, I know obviously the verdict is, a win for the family, but past the charity, being at home with the kids, I mean, what?
Well, currently they live in a house that's not wheelchair accessible, and it's really, really difficult for Tony to get through the house. They actually have, the only shower at the home is upstairs, and it's a real struggle every day for Tony to get up the stairs. So when they're able to finalize the verdict and get paid by Advocate Health Partners, their goal primarily is to make sure that they get a home that is accessible for Tony, and certainly a shower that's accessible for him, so that daily activities that we take for granted are made a little bit easier for them.
Do you know if there were any consequences or discipline to this particular physician at all?
No.
Still working?
So an interesting thing to know about this case, one of the legal fights that were front and center in the lawsuit was a topic of agency. Advocate Health Partners took a position that their contracted, what they call aligned physician, was not an agent of the health organization. They claimed that the doctor was an independent contractor. So much of the evidence that the jury heard was in an attempt to try to determine if this managed care organization controlled or had the right to control the doctor. The jury found, after hearing the evidence, that the managed care organization, Advocate Health Care, or Advocate Health Partners, Advocate Physician Partners, actually did have the right to control or actually did control the doctor in our case. So, to directly answer your question, one of the ways that we were able to prove that Advocate Health Partners controlled the doctors is that Advocate Health Partners required their physicians to follow something called a clinical integration program. And through that clinical integration program, there's over 100 different metrics that the doctors were required to follow under their contract. And from what we were told in the evidence in the case is that if the doctor failed to follow certain clinical integration guidelines, there could be discipline within the organization for the doctor not meeting his threshold standard. What the jury also heard is that as part of this clinical integration program, there was incentive payments that got paid back to the physician every year if they followed Advocate Health Partners rules and clinical integration program. And the jury heard evidence that not directly for patient care, but for meeting clinical integration bonuses, the doctor that was at issue in our case actually ended up getting a $50,000 check from the organization. That was part of the evidence the jury heard to determine if there was an agency.
That was after Mr. Kelly's situation, or before, the bonus.
The bonus is yearly. So this doctor
received it after this situation.
Well, no, the doctor had been a member of this organization dating back to about in the mid-2000s. So he had been part of this organization for a number of years. So by the time 2015 came, over a decade he had been with the program. We did not introduce evidence into the jury trial of any prior incentive payments other than to put in the incentive payment that was paid in the year 2015 to the doctor.
What do you think really pushed the jurors in this case? What was the emotional element that really, you think, got the verdict?
I don't think the jury had an emotional element that they made their decision on. I really think that the jury made the decision based on the medical facts that we presented, and the evidence was overwhelming. The national guidelines, there's a document that's published on a regular basis called the JNC, and it is a national guideline that talks about how to manage and monitor blood pressure and how to treat it. And our argument is that the standard of care required compliance with the JNC, and the evidence in the case was that the JNC was not followed. For instance, the JNC requires doctors to repeat blood pressure. As we told you, the blood pressure in our case was at a level of a hypertensive urgency. And blood pressure being that high, the standard of care and the JNC recommend that you repeat it in the same office visit. So instead of sending a patient home, what a doctor is supposed to do is wait say 30 minutes, and then take the blood pressure again and see if it is still markedly elevated. And if it is, you need to make sure you treat it and not send your patient home. There's also some other testing, such as an EKG, that would have been very helpful to help diagnose hypertension. That wasn't done. And then there would have been an evaluation of the eye that the JNC requires and the standard of care requires, where a doctor uses a fundoscope, which is like the little, it's like a magnifying glass and a lens that the doctor looks into and looks at the vessels, the blood vessels in the eye, to determine if there's been any issues with high blood pressure. It wasn't done in our case, and I think the jury made their decision because the basic standard of care, fundamental medicine, was not followed.
And was the cough extreme enough to be the primary, like that's why the physician was like, this cough is so bad,
Well,
it must be that?
So that's an interesting question, and I'm happy you asked that. The cough that came up started around Thanksgiving time. That's the evidence that we heard in the case. The cough started about Thanksgiving, and then our visit happened January 29th. It was about a 2-month-long cough. And the doctor diagnosed that cough as being due to bronchitis. The real truth of what was happening is that because of the hypertensive urgency, the blood pressure was as high as it was, the patient was having something called heart failure. And from heart failure, you get pulmonary edema, which is where your lungs get a little bit of fluid in them. And the evidence that we brought at trial that was persuasive is that the cough was a symptom of his high blood pressure that was causing pulmonary edema. So there was certainly a fact dispute over what the cough was due to. And there was two sides of the coin, and I think the jury understood, and I think the evidence very much supported the fact that Tony's cough was due to pulmonary edema, not a 2-month-long bronchitis, which would be a really unusual presentation.